The Song Beneath the Floorboards. Elorin woke to the soft blue before dawn and lay still in his narrow bed, feeling the tower breathe around him as if Wistmere were a living companion easing into the morning, the walls exhaling the last delicate coolness of night while the floor kept the memory of yesterday's warmth. And he listened the way he had learned to listen since he returned from the river of slow hours, not only with his ears but with his skin and bones and the patient space he made inside his thoughts and within. That listening he noticed a new thread in the familiar chorus, a gentle humming that seemed to rise from beneath the boards near his bed. Not a call for haste, not a signal of trouble, only a tone that existed because this was a house where quiet things liked to sing. He rolled onto his side and pressed his cheek to the wood, the grain cool against his skin, and the hum touched his bones with the friendliness of a cat's purr, simple and steady and tender. And as he listened it filled the little alcove with a feeling like candlelight, softening edges and asking him to draw nearer without moving at all. He whispered good morning to the sound because he had learned that even a sound is grateful to be greeted, and the hum steadied in reply as if it had been waiting for his voice to make a bridge. He sat up, raked his silver-flecked hair from his eyes with the heel of his hand, and eased his bare feet to the floor, thanking the boards the way he always did for supporting his small weight. And when he placed his palm upon the place where the singing gathered, he felt a faint vibration like the memory of strings stirred by careful fingers. He considered waking Master Aldrin, yet the tune felt like a secret spoken directly to him, and the tower, which often replied to his thoughts with a deeper hush or a warmer stone, seemed to invite him to look for himself. So Elorin fetched the little pry he kept with his ink and brushes for lifting lids and nails, and he slipped the tip between board and board with the kind of patience he had learned from watering the starlit garden, then levered gently until the seam opened with a sigh soft as old paper closing. Beneath the board lay a shallow pocket of shadow and dust that smelled of cedar and beeswax and the long, kind breath of the house. And in the hollow rested a wrapped shape no longer than his forearm, the cloth faded and thin as a washed sky. He lifted the bundle and cradled it to the window where the bluish light was beginning to gather, and he untied the frayed ribbon with steady fingers and folded back the cloth the way one folds back a blanket from a sleeping guest. And there lay a small harp made with the care of someone who had understood that an instrument is also a promise. The wood was dark in the neck and pillar as if it had sipped many evenings by a fire, the soundboard pale as cream, the strings fine and bright like silver threads spun by a spider who loved the moon. And when Elorin laid his fingers along the curve he felt warmth as if the harp had a heartbeat of its own. He did not pluck at once. He sat with the harp upon his knees and spoke to it in a low voice as he had spoken to a bird that landed on his windowsill last spring, telling it who he was and what he had learned in recent nights. About the river that slowed hours until they opened like flowers, about the garden that woke only for stars and folded again at dawn with the dignity of velvet, about the cat whose paws shone like small coins of moonlight when it walked the air where no rail or beam lay, about the tower that listened and answered in temperature and hush, about the way a candle flame leaned when he whispered near it and then stood upright again as if grateful to be consulted. The harp seemed to grow lighter as he talked, and when he finally drew a fingertip across one string, the sound rose as if a fine silk had been shaken gently and allowed to settle again, and the note carried a roundness that reminded him of the river's slow bellies of water where trout held position with almost no movement at all. He plucked another string, then another, listening to the way each tone spread and then softened, leaving behind an aftertaste of calm like honey dissolved in warm milk. And soon a melody offered itself, simple and unadorned, like a child's hand ready to be held. And Elorin followed it without pressing, letting it find its shape at the pace of his breathing. The tower answered him. He felt it more than heard it, a deepening of the floor beneath his crossed legs, a tender vibration through the stones of the wall against his shoulder, and even the narrow window seemed to change the way it breathed, admitting air with the courtesy of one who opens a door slowly so as not to startle. He played until the blue at the window widened to pearl and the first small birds called to one another across the orchard. And then he set his palm upon the soundboard to quiet the strings the way one rests a hand upon a child's hair when the story is done. And he wrapped the harp again and returned it to its pocket under the floor, leaving the board easy to lift should the house ask for more music before night. He dressed and went down the stair that curled the way rivers curl, and at each step his feet felt the echo of the note he had last played, and he thought how music, like fragrance, remains even after its source is hidden. And in the kitchen Master Aldrin was already awake, turning a spoon in a small blue bowl while the kettle began to mutter. The old wizard glanced at Elorin's face and smiled as though he had been told everything by a beam of light, and he set 2 cups upon the table without hurry so that the air could warm above them, and with tea steaming in the quiet they spoke low. Elorin told him of the hum beneath the boards and of the little harp, and of the first notes that had bloomed in the room like fog lifting from the river. And Aldrin nodded with the satisfaction of one who has kept a gift safe until a friend is ready. And he said there were years in the tower when apprentices struggled to hear themselves under the weight of study, and that in such seasons certain instruments were hidden in corners and floors, not to be locked away but to wait for the pupil, whose hands would greet them gently, and that these were not meant for performance or applause but for attunement, for reminding the heart of its steady measure, the steady measure that sleep and waking share when the day has been lived with care. The boy asked if he might tune the harp in the open room and let the tower hear it in daylight, and Aldrin chuckled and told him that houses are like cats. They love to keep company while pretending not to, and that if he played near the window the orchard would bend to listen too. So Elorin lifted the board again and brought the harp into the study where Sun now lay in a long rectangle across the rug, and he set the instrument in the light so the wood could bask and unlearn the memory of the pocket. And with slow work he nudged the strings, not toward a strict pitch but toward a texture that pleased the room, testing the sound against the hush of the shelves and the softness of the curtains, listening for that moment when a string stops resisting and begins to purr. When he began to play, he did not think of cleverness or of triumph. He thought of ordinary gestures that wished to be seen. The placing of a cup upon a shelf, the folding of linen so the crease lies flat, the wiping of a crumb from a table and the thoughtful brushing of it into the palm so that no small life is disturbed. And he let each gesture become a phrase, rising 2 steps and falling 1, as if the melody itself had learned good manners. Out of the open window drifted the scent of crushed mint and damp earth from the garden that slept by day and bloomed by starlight. And when Elorin played a line that rose gently and then rested, he felt the folded flowers stir as if hearing someone they loved in another room. A bee crossed the rectangle of light and buzzed with a note almost but not quite the same as his low string, and he matched the tone for a breath, and the bee slowed and considered the window as if it had been invited to stay. The cat with silver paws appeared as it often did, walking along the top rail of the stair with all the dignity of a creature who can place weight upon air, and it sat upon the sill without bending the curtain and blinked, and Elorin played a tiny arpeggio that said hello in the language of paws, and the cat blinked again in that slow way that is the purest form of trust. Through the morning he played and paused and listened and played again, learning how the harp wished to be touched, finding that when he struck too quickly the sound thinned like water spilled from a jar, but when he stroked with patience the note thickened and traveled along the walls as a scent travels along a hall. And he learned that resting his palm lightly upon the strings before he lifted it back made a softness at the edges of every tone that the tower preferred. He thought of the river of slow hours where a single droplet had hung from moss and held within it upside-down skies and a curved boy's face. And he tried to make a note that behaved the same, full enough to contain a reflection without bursting, and the string answered with a fullness that pleased him so much he laughed softly, and the laugh joined the tone and made it brighter. When hunger arrived he did not hurry but set the harp down the way one lays a sleeping child in a cradle, then went to the kitchen where Aldrin had set out a heel of bread, a nub of cheese and 2 early apples, and they ate without much talk while the kettle sent a playful ribbon of steam toward the cracked plaster above the stove, and the steam drew a shape like a harp in the air and then forgot it again. After the meal Elorin carried the instrument to the threshold because some songs wish to step outdoors even when the body remains inside. And he sat on the stone and played for the doorway, low notes for the foot-worn sill, sweet notes for the latch, and a little run that made the bell shake once without ringing. And there in the earliest afternoon he felt the house perk as a cat perks when a familiar person opens a book and sits in a chair, a quiet readiness that asks for nothing and yet says everything. He took the harp to the orchard and sat where the shade fell and dapples through unshaken leaves, and he tried a melody made of walks between trees, ending each line with the soft tap of a fingertip against the soundboard so that the fruit could feel the rhythm through the branch. And though he did not look for proof, he liked to think that the apples gathered a little sweetness at each pause. He went to the riverbank where he had once watched lights carry memories downstream, and he played a line that called to those orbs without naming them, and the surface of the water answered with rings that spread with the exact calmness of a lullaby, and a dragonfly landed for a long moment upon the pillar of the harp and widened its wings as if to collect sounded light. In the late day he returned to the study and played the tower a song about the chores of evening, about wiping the table and setting the broom with bristles lifted, about rinsing the cup and turning it upside down so water could separate cleanly. And the tower replied by warming the stones under his feet in a way that felt like approval. He kept this habit for many days. Sometimes he played for the cellar where apples dream and the low notes found a corner of sweetness beneath the stairs and stored it there for times when rain kept everyone below. Sometimes he played in the little storeroom of drawers old caretakers had labeled with pencil, and the thin strings liked it there, and the music loosened the lids on jars as if to remind them that generosity is the easiest kind of magic. Sometimes he played in the kitchen and found that if he ended a phrase on a whisper, the stew would choose to simmer rather than boil, and the scent of rosemary would unwind with patience and fill the room without rushing the tongue. All the while he noticed how his hands began to treat every object as if it were a string waiting to be sounded, gentle upon the broom, gentle upon the latch, gentle when folding linen, gentle when turning a page. And in this way the music did not only come from the harp, it came from the life around it. And the tower was the instrument upon which kindness played. One evening the air promised rain in the language of low light and still leaves, and Elorin carried the harp to the window seat where he had stacked bowls of clear water to reflect stars for the starlit garden. And though the bowls now held only sky, he let the bowls listen with the same attentiveness they used for stars. And he began a tune that rose like a bed being made and then rested like a hand upon a pillow. And as he played, the first drops began one by one, each drop a little bell that found the rhythm without effort, and soon the roof spoke in a quick, quiet pattern, and the downspout hummed a soft baritone, and the stairs held their breath so they would not interrupt. And in that modest household orchestra Elorin heard once again the river of slow hours, for rain is a slow river falling. He thought then of the hum that had woken him and wondered if the harp still kept a breath under the floor even when it was in his hands. And he lowered the instrument and pressed his ear to the board, and yes, there it was, a faint resonance like the last glow of a coal, a memory of sound stored so that the house would have it when needed, a comfort waiting on a shelf. Later that night, when he returned the harp to its pocket, he did not close the board tight, but laid it loosely so the music could climb out in a whisper and move through his sleep. And he did sleep, and the dreams that came were clear and ordinary and kind, full of washing windows and placing spoons and speaking low greetings to a fox at the edge of the orchard. And everywhere in his dream was a tone that made everything agree with everything else. In the morning Master Aldrin asked him to bring the harp to the roof walk at dusk and try a longer song, not for the tower alone but for the hill and the river path and the small households that warmed their rooms as the day dimmed. And Elorin felt his heart become still with a good sort of seriousness, the kind that arrives when one is being trusted. The day passed in a clean, simple sequence: study, sweeping, a cup turned to dry, a visit to the garden to fold back its net and feel the leaves under his fingers, a moment with the cat who stepped from a beam to the air and from the air to a shelf and from the shelf to the page of an open book without leaving a wrinkle. And at dusk he climbed with the wrapped harp to the roof where the last light gathered like butter in a warm bowl. He sat and waited until the first lamp lit in a window below, then unwrapped the instrument and let it breathe. And when he began, he chose a tune that unfolded from one note the way a wave unfolds from a calm sea. And he kept the pace human, which is to say slower than hurry and quicker than sleep. And as he played, he let his mind walk a path across the roofs and down the lanes and out the gate and along the river, greeting in imagination the people he could not see. He pictured a baker leaning his wrists upon a table and feeling his pulse answer the line. He pictured an old woman easing into a chair and allowing the cushion to hold her while the melody laid a soft cloth over her thoughts. He pictured a child being tucked into bed while a mother sang a quiet line of her own that dovetailed with his at the corners. And he pictured the river taking a copy of the song and carrying it to the next bend where someone would hear it and not know why the evening felt lighter. The tower listened as a friend listens and kept the last ounce of each note so that the roof would not feel lonely when the tune ended. When the final phrase came, he placed it gently on the air like a folded blanket on a windowsill. And he sat until the stars found their places and Aldrin's step sounded on the stair. And together they looked out over the fields that had turned to cool silver. And neither spoke because neither needed to. After that night, Elorin noticed that the harp's song had found its way into places where his hands did not reach. The door opened as if it loved to grant passage. The broom stood straight and patient without slipping. The stove sent up warmth with a small contented hum as if it had learned the refrain. When he walked down the town lane the next market day, he thought he heard someone humming the line he had sent from the roof. And when he looked, he saw a girl smoothing a ribbon on her basket. And the ribbon lay flat with such satisfaction that he knew the song had arrived. He returned to Wistmere and played for the harp once more, and the instrument felt even warmer, as though it too had been thanked all day by surfaces and hinges and cups. Late that evening the hum beneath the floorboards began again, softer than soft, almost not a sound but the memory of one, and Elorin lifted the board and placed his palm on the harp's neck without removing it. And in that touch he felt something like a speech that was not words, a current of agreement passing from wood to bone to stone. And he understood that the instrument was not only a maker of music but a keeper of balance, and that by listening to it he learned how to couch his own life in that same balance. He sealed the board with a mindful gentleness and lay down, and the tune that filled the room did not come from strings now but from the way the whole house had learned to breathe. And his chest found the rhythm at once, and his eyes drifted closed as if a feather had been laid upon them, and his last thought before sleep was a bright, childlike gratitude that in the place he called home there was a room under the floor where music rested and remembered him, and he promised in the secret, way of a sleepy boy to keep visiting and to keep playing and to keep treating every small motion as if it were a note worthy of patience. And within that promise he slept the strong, gentle sleep that arrives when the world and the heart stand in the same key and hold it kindly until morning.